Hey everyone, Nikki here with the Inside Story, and today is our last and final chapter of Strange the Dreamer by Laini Taylor. So this is chapter 6. Paper, Ink, in Years. Coincidence? For hundreds of years, alchemists have been trying to distill azoth. 3 weeks after Laszlo's visit to the Chirosopathicium, Dion Nero did it. Laszlo had his suspicions, but they were only suspicions, until, that is, he opened the door to his room and found Dion in it. Laszlo's pulse stammered. His books were spilled onto the floor, their pages creased beneath them like the broken wings of birds. Dion held one in his hands, and it was Laszlo's finest, its binding nearly worthy of the Pavilion of Thought. He'd even illuminated the spine with flakes of leftover gold leaf it took him 3 years to save. The Unseen City, it read, in the calligraphy he learned at the Abbey. It hit the floor with a slap, and Laszlo felt it in his heart. He wanted to stoop and pick it up, but he just stood there on his own threshold and stared at the intruder, so composed, so elegant, and as out of place in the dingy little room as a sunbeam in a cellar. "Does anyone know that you came to the Chirosopathicium?" Dion asked. Slowly, Laszlo shook his head. "And the book, does anyone else know about it?" And there it was. There was no coincidence. Laszlo had been right. Spirit was the key to azoth. It was almost funny. Not just that the truth had been found in a fairy tale, but that the great secret ingredient should prove so common a thing as a bodily fluid. Every alchemist who had ever lived and died in search of it had the answer all the time, running through his very veins. If the truth were to be known, anyone with a pot and a fire would try to make gold, drawing spirit from their veins, or stealing it from others. It wouldn't be so precious then, and nor would the golden godson be so special. With that, he understood what was at the stake. Dion meant to keep the secret of azoth at all costs. And Laszlo was definitely a cost. He considered lying, but could think of no lie that might protect him. Hesitant, he shook his head again, and he thought he had never been so aware of anything as he was aware of Dion's hand on the hilt of his sword. Time slowed. He watched Dion's knuckles whiten, saw the span of visible steel lengthen as the sword was drawn up and out of its sheath. It had a curve to it, like a rib. It had a mirror brightness in the grave light, and caught gold in it, and gray. Laszlo's eyes locked with Dion's. He saw calculation there as Dion weighed the trouble of killing him with the risk of letting him live. And he knew how the calculus would come out. With him alive, there would always be someone who knew the secret, while killing him would be no trouble at all. Dion might leave his engraved ancestral sword skewered through Laszlo's corpse, and it would be returned to him cleaned. The whole thing would simply be tidied away. Someone like Nero might do as he liked to someone like Laszlo. But he didn't. He sheathed the blade. "You will never speak of it," he said. "You will never write of it. No one will ever know. Do you understand me?" "Yes," said Laszlo, hoarse. "Swear to it," Dion ordered, but then he cast his eyes over the books on the floor and abruptly changed his mind. "On second thought, don't swear." His lips curved in a subtle jeer. "Promise me 3 times." Laszlo was startled. A triple promise? It was a child's vow from fairy tales, where breaking it was a curse, and it was more powerful to Laszlo than any vow on god or monarch would have been. "I promise," he said, shaking with the chill of his own near death. "I promise," he said again, and his face was hot and burning. "I promise." The words repeated and had the rhythm of an incantation, and they were the last that passed between the 2 young men for more than 4 years, until the day the golden godson came in person to the inquiry's desk to requisition Laszlo's books, the complete works of Laszlo Strange. Gripping the request form, Laszlo's hand shook. The books were his, and they were all that was his. He had made them, and he loved them in the way one loves things that come from one's own hands. But even that wasn't the extent of it. They weren't just a collection of notes. They were where he kept his impossible dream, every discovery he'd made about the unseen city, every piece he'd puzzled into place, and it wasn't for the simple accumulation of knowledge, but with the goal of one day circumventing impossibility, of somehow going there where no outsider had ever been, of crossing the desert, seeing those glittering domes with his own eyes, and finding out at last what had happened to the unseen city. His books were a 7-year-long record of his hopes. Even touching them gave him courage, and now they were to fall into Dion Nero's hands? What in the world, Master Hyrroken had asked, could Dion Nero want with your books? I don't know, said Laszlo at a loss. Nothing, only to take them away from me. The old man clucked his tongue. Surely such pettiness is beneath him. You think so? Well, then perhaps he intends to read them cover to cover. Laszlo's tone was flat, and Master Hyrroken took his point. That scenario was indeed the more ridiculous. But why? Hyrroken persisted. Why would he want to take them from you? And Laszlo couldn't tell him that. What he himself was wondering was, why now, 4 years later? He had done nothing to break his promises, or to draw Nero's ire in any way. Because he can? He asked, bleak. He fought the requisition. Of course he did. He went straight to the Master of Archives to plead his case. The books were his own, he said, and not property of the library. It had always been made clear that the expertise of librarians was unworthy of the term scholarship. As such, how could they now be claimed? It was contradictory and unjust. Unjust? You ought to be proud, young man, Vilers, the master, told him. Dion Nero had taken an interest in your work. It's a great day for you. A great day indeed. For 7 years Laszlo had been Strange the Dreamer, and his books had been scribblings and foolishness. Now, just like that, they were his work, validated and stolen in one swell swoop. Please, he begged, urgent and hushed, please don't give him my books. And they didn't. They made him do it. You're disgracing yourself, Vilers snapped, and I won't have you disgrace the library too. He's the golden godson, not some thief in the stacks. He'll return them when he's done with them. Now be off with you. And so he had no choice. He loaded them into a crate and onto a handcart and trundled them out of the library, through the front gates and down the long road that spiraled around Zosimo's ridge. He paused and looked out. The Eater sparkled in the sun, the rich brown of a pretty girl's eyes. The new palace arched across it, as fantastical as a painted backdrop in a fairy play. Birds wheeled over the fishing docks, and a long golden pennant flew from the cupola of Nero's pale pink palace. Laszlo made his slow way there, and rang the bell with deep reluctance. Remembered ringing another bell 4 years earlier, with Miracles for Breakfast clutched in his hands. He'd never seen it again. Would these books be any different? A butler answered. He bid Laszlo leave the crate, but Laszlo refused. I must see Lord Nero, he said. And then Dion at last presented himself. Laszlo asked him simply, why? Why? The alchemist was in his shirt sleeve without his scarlet cravat. His blade was in its place, though, and his hand rested casually on its hilt. I've always wanted to ask you that, you know. Me? Yes. Why, Strange? Why did you give it to me? It, the secret, and all that followed, when you might have kept it and have been someone yourself. The truth was, and nothing would have persuaded Nero to believe it, that it had never occurred to Laszlo to seek his own advantage, and the tomb walk that day had been very clear to him. Here was a story of greedy queens and wicked fathers and war on the horizon, and it wasn't his story. It was Dion's. To take it for himself, it would have been stealing. It was as simple as that. I am someone, he said. He gestured to the crate. That's who I am, and then with quiet intensity, don't take them, please. There was a moment, very brief, when he guarded dispassion fell away from Dion's face, and Laszlo saw something human in him, regretful even, and then it was gone. Remember your promise, he warned, and shut the door in Laszlo's face. Laszlo returned to his room late that evening, having lingered at dinner to avoid it. Reaching his door, he took his glaive down off its hook, hesitated, and then hung it back up. With a deep breath he entered. He hoped the darkness might soften the loss, but there was just enough moonlight to bathe his window ledge in a soft glow. Its emptiness was stark. The room felt hollow and dead, like a body with its heart cut out. Breathing wasn't easy, and he dropped on the edge of his bed. They're only books, he told himself, just paper and ink. Paper, ink, and years. Paper, ink, years in his dream. He shook his head, and his dream was in his mind and in his soul. Dion might steal his books, but he couldn't steal that. That was what he told himself that first long night, barefoot of his books, and he had trouble falling asleep for wondering where they were and what Nero had done to them. He might have burned them or put them into a moldering cell. He might even now be pulling them apart page by page, folding them into birds, and launching them off his high widow's walk, one by one. When he finally did sleep, Laszlo dreamed his books were buried beneath the earth, and that the blades of grass that grew up from them whispered, "Weep, weep," when the winds blew, and all who heard it felt tears prick their eyes. Never once did he consider that Thyone might be reading them, that in a room as opulent as Laszlo's was plain, with his feet up on a tufted stool and a glaive on either side, he was reading long into the night while servants brought him tea and supper, and tea again. Laszlo certainly never imagined him taking notes, with a swan quill and octopus ink from an inkwell of inlaid lists that had actually come from Weep some 500 years ago. His handsome face was devoid of mockery or malice, and was instead intent, alive, and fascinated. Which is so much worse, because if Laszlo thought a dream could not be stolen, he underestimated Thyone Nero. Alright guys, that was chapter 6, and the last chapter of our inside look at Strange the Dreamer. So tomorrow I'm going to catch up with you guys and let you know if I'm going to continue on reading the series or not. So this is the first book in the duology, and the second one is Muse of Nightmares. So I'll see you guys tomorrow. Bye.